We are not our circumstances, and while privilege, environment, the past and our place in the world play a huge role in our outcomes, we are not completely without a say in the way our lives twist and turn. And although copying the morning routines of billionaires is unlikely to turn us into billionaires, our mindset can play a huge role in the quality of our lives. It's been said 1,000 quotable times over 1,000 years, but Henry Ford summed it up well enough when he uttered the words, "If you think you can do a thing, or you think you can't do a thing, you're right." In a society with heavy constructs, frameworks and conventions around the idea of how life should be lived, it's very easy to give up our ownership of life and instead wait in vain for our time to come, for our big break, or to put the blame on external factors for everything that goes wrong in our lives. Surely it's not our fault we've put on all this weight when they've only gone and opened a McDonald's next door. But when we start to take ownership of our choices, of our situation, of our failures and also our successes, the world starts to bend to our will. We see our results improve. We begin to find out what works and what doesn't. All that we need is to get out of our own way. As I discussed with Gabriela Blandy, who is a mindset coach for writers and creative entrepreneurs, we can reprogram ourselves to go from can't to can. It just takes awareness, faith, and a little bit of effort. As motivational speaker David Brooks said, almost every successful person begins with two beliefs. The future can be better than the present, and I have the power to make it so. And we can train ourselves to have those beliefs, as this conversation highlights. You can find out more about Gabriela, her work and her empowering free masterclass at gabrielablandy.org. All the links to her website, socials and YouTube channel are in the show notes at www.conversationsonliving.com, and you can also find a link to that fantastic masterclass there too. And before we get started, I just want to give a quick nod to the guys at Headliner. It's the service I use to create audiograms. So these are little audio clips and they have a kind of waveform animated over the top of them. You've probably seen them on Instagram, Twitter. They're very popular with podcasters. And a great way for me to kind of spread the word about the kind of podcast episodes that I'm sharing. And the guys at Headliner are very kindly supporting this podcast. So check out Headliner if you run a podcast yourself. It's at headliner.app. Right, so let's get on with the conversation. You're listening to Conversations on Living. I'm Chris Brock, and I hope you find this chat with Gabriela Blandy useful as we talk about how to get out of your own way. So Gabriela, hi. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. You are a mindset coach for sort of writers, creatives, creative entrepreneurs and people like that. And we've had a kind of a coaching session in the past, but I wanted to speak to you because a lot of the stuff you post online is about getting out of your own way. And there's a lot of this kind of sense of, I think a lot of people like me feel like I can never have the good life because X, Y, and Z. I can never have the life of my dreams because of this, that, and the other. But a lot of these things are just kind of blocks in our own heads, and we worry what people might think, or of failing, or things not working out for us. But you seem to be a bit of an expert in helping people get over those hurdles. So how do you get started in creating your perfect life? How does it work?
Well, firstly, Chris, thanks for having me here. I've been looking forward to this conversation, so I really appreciate being invited onto your podcast.
No, thank you.
And yeah, it's great to just dive straight in. When you mention this idea of the blocks, or this thought that we might have where we don't think that life is available to us, and how do we start to do work in this area? The best way that I can describe it is to give people an image of the brain and a sense that there is a road or a street network that's currently built in the brain. So you might have a grid of roads, and those roads go places. Those roads lead to venues and destinations. So those roads are built from experiences that we've had in the past, memories. And every time we dwell on a past failure or evidence of why we don't think we're good enough, maybe the teacher who pulled us up in class and made a fool of us because of something that we'd written, or maybe an adult who laughed at us when we shared our dream of being a famous director. So we've got these experiences of these roads that go to these rather painful or debilitating memories. So then what happens is we start to have a dream. Oh, I really dream of living off my creativity, of being able to sustain myself through my artistic gifts. So we've essentially created a location or a destination, but we don't yet have a road that leads to that destination. So we set off, but we accidentally set off on the road that leads to our experience of not being good enough, because the mind is very automatic in the way that it goes down these roads. So my job essentially is to take a client to find out the destination that they want to get to and to figure out how we can build a highway that takes us to that destination. So we might use some of the current road infrastructure, but what I'm always looking out for is there a block in that road infrastructure? Is there a pothole that they keep falling into? Or is there a road that they keep taking, thinking it's going to get them somewhere, but then always ends up in the same place? So we're looking for infrastructure that's currently working to continue to build on it. And we're looking to make sure that they don't go down those dead ends and what's taking them down those dead ends.
So this sounds a lot like neuroplasticity. You're kind of rewriting those neural networks in ways that benefit you rather than ways that kind of trip you up. But how do you know you've got a blockage and this isn't actually reality, and it's actually your mindset? Where does that come from?
It's such a great question, Chris, because that will be something that will first begin when I start talking to a client. They might say, I've always had this dream of being a writer and living, working in a little garden shed at the bottom of the garden and spending my days writing fiction and selling books online. But I just don't feel like it's possible. I think that kind of thing happens to other people and not people like me. And then what they do is they give me evidence. They give me a whole list of all of the things that prove that can't happen. And so, yes, their belief very much is, look, this is reality. This isn't just something that's happening in my mind. Look, I submitted my book to an agent and it got rejected, or I wrote a book and I'm trying to sell it, but no one's buying it. So look, I've got the proof. So the analogy I like to work with here is, say I had a coin and a coin's got heads and tails. And of course, I flip that coin and there's just as much chance of it landing on a head as there is it landing on a tail. But if I've got this belief that coin is a little bit cursed and that it's always landing on heads, every time it lands on a head, I'll say to you, look, Chris, do you see this coin is cursed? It lands on a head. Say I flip it and it lands on a tail and you go, but wait, what about that? I'm like, oh, wait, no, hang on. I didn't flip it right that time. Like, let me show you again. So there'll always be, if there's a bit of success or a bit of a sign, hey, look, maybe this time you are going to make it. What the mind immediately does is it senses, wait a second, she's just about to build a highway to her dreams. And this is scary. Let's find a way to say that doesn't really count, or like that was a fluke. And so the mind is going to show you the reality that corroborates where it wants to stay put. So it's not going to accept the tails. It's going to say, oh, the wind blew, but the wind isn't always going to blow. Like that was a fluke, like toss it again. And then you'll keep tossing it. And then as soon as it goes to a head, you're going to feel like, oh, phew, that feels more familiar, even though the familiar life that you're staying put in isn't really the life you want. But it's the mind, and it's mostly fear that wants your mind to keep you in this familiar place.
Because it can take a lot of courage, can't it, to take a leap of faith. And I mean, there are so many quotes. I'm a bit of an addict for inspirational quotes, and there are so many quotes about kind of only when the pain of staying the same is less than the pain of change are we going to actually take that leap. All that. There are loads of quotes like that. But it's very easy to get stuck and to get comfortable and be in a rut and kind of, life is miserable, but at the same time, it's easier just to stay here than it is to kind of take a leap and make the effort to do something else that might not work anyway. Where do we get that push from? Do we turn to someone like you, or is it something we can find in ourselves to kind of have the courage to take a leap? How does it work?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting area to explore. So there's two parts to this question. Let's look at the first one, which is, do we turn to someone like me? there's a great Einstein quote, which is, we can't solve the problem with the thinking that created it. So I'm a huge advocate of having that person by your side. Like, I work as a coach, but I always have a coach that I'm working with as well, because I know that the brain is always going to give you that blind spot. And ironically, what's in your blind spot is often what you want. So yes, I would certainly recommend, if someone is looking to make change in their life or up level their career, really create a life and a career that feels exciting to them, that they do find some way of getting support. Now, the second part of your question, which is this idea of like, what is it about that pain? And, what is it about the pain that's kind of the driver? So what's going on here is the brain is designed to keep us safe. Okay. So what happens is, when that pain really escalates, what happens in the mind is an understanding that now the comfort zone has become unsafe. And so the brain will relinquish its control to keep you in that place, because it's recognizing this place is no longer this place is no longer good for our survival, so we're going to have to relocate. So that's often why it does take that wake up call. Sometimes people get ill and they're like, oh my God, like, look at the way I've been living my life. So the brain is like, holy crap, if we keep living in this way, we're actually going to die. So, okay, fine. I'm happy for you to make change. Like, it's safer to make change. So I think, again, when someone's in this place, it's to start to really get a sense of how it is safer to make change, or it's going to be more beneficial for their life in terms of staying alive. And in terms of how we can look at that creatively, like, I always encourage my clients to think about the difference between just surviving, like in this kind of discomfort, miserable comfort zone, and like creatively living, the difference between just surviving and like living and thriving and really nourishing your soul, to see that as living. And then the mind starts to understand, oh, that's what life is. It isn't just waking up and breathing. It's waking up and feeling alive about the work that you do and the people that you're having an impact on.
It's difficult though, because I've been in a situation where I've been a freelancer, and it's very, very hard to make ends meet. And then that spiraled, and I got quite depressed, and it was a lot of effort, and I got stuck in a rut, and I was stuck in a rut for quite a long time. But it was being at rock bottom that kind of eventually forced me to kind of take the blinkers off and kind of assess my options and start to face things and to make changes, because it was as bad as it could possibly get. But then there are people who would love to write a book, but actually they've got a salary and things are quite comfortable, and even though their day-to-day existence doesn't make them happy, it ticks all the boxes and puts food on the table and roof over their head. How do you get someone to build up the kind of the momentum and the push to actually take a chance and embrace a bit of danger when actually things are pretty good right now, and I've got nothing to complain about?
Mm. Well, I think that last phrase, I've got nothing to complain about. So we might start to explore, well, what if you had a life that was worth raving about? And to be honest, Chris, sometimes that question in itself can get some resistance, because people are like, oh, well, I'm just not the kind of person that deserves that kind of a life, or those kinds of lives, that they're not that common. Like, most of us just get to have the life that we don't complain about. So I think it's, first of all, to just negotiate with a client or with an inquiry that sense, because we do have it, that sense of like more, or that sense of desire for something. And for me, this is the work, and why I love working with writers and creatives, because we kind of have that inner calling for more, or for a deeper self-expression. So I'm really enabling people to tune in to that desire for more, or that desire to reach people or touch people, because often that's at the heart of what someone wants to do as an entrepreneur or as a writer. They want to have an impact on others. And so we start to get them to experience that different life. And so we come into the real state of imagination where they're suddenly like, oh wow, like, okay, if I had a day where I would be waking up and I would be living by my own hours and I'd be making the kind of money that I wanted to, and that would enable me to have more time off to travel and spend with my family. But I was also aware that I'd written a book and people and we're changing people's lives. So when they start to explore this alternate version of reality for themselves, there's a moment at which fear and resistance sort of just fall away. And I think that is the magic of the coaching space, and it is the magic of the work that I do, where I'm really giving them that space to dream and to dream big. So when that fear and that resistance falls away, they get that sense of freedom of like, oh my God, if I really follow this desire, like, wow, it's going to take me somewhere really cool. And so we get that glimpse. And if that's an inquiry, the person might have enough of that glimpse to be like, do you know what? Like, I'm going to go for it. Like, what I saw, what I was describing to you really feels like a life that I would regret not living. But sometimes it might be that a person gets to that point and then they shut down because they think it's not possible. So it might be that a little bit of deeper work is needed, or it might be that they then go back and they say, no, I'm not interested in working with you. I don't want to take this any further. I just don't think it's possible. So it's a real step by step. It's like we do a little bit of dreaming. We explore the possibilities. We see if there's a shutdown. If there's not, we then negotiate the fears. And then we have to negotiate every single belief that's like the roadblock that needs to be navigated in order to build that highway to get to that destination that they've been describing.
There's a sense that potentially anybody could live the life of their dreams. What do you think the biggest problem is? Is it that we don't know what we want? Is it that we're afraid of, we feel guilty if we got it, if we're worried about what people will think? What do you think is stopping just absolutely everybody going out there and creating a beautiful life for themselves?
So your point that we could all essentially live the life of our dreams. So if we just look at what that means as a phrase, so living the life of our dreams is living a life that we're describing from this prefrontal cortex, this part of our brain, which is the imaginative part of our brain. Okay, so we can describe a life from our imagination here. What stops us and what stops the majority of the people from turning that into reality is that they spend very little time in this part of the brain. So we can spend up to 95% of every day back in our lizard brain, which is the automatic part of our brain. And so what's going on in the lizard brain is stuff that's happened in the past. So we've got this beautiful future that's waiting for us, that's new, that's different, that's created from this imaginative part of our brain. But if we're spending up to 95% just automatically running in our lizard brain, all we're doing day to day to day is creating more of the same. And so I would say the main thing, like in terms of the clients that I work with, the conversations I have with people on social media, is that they are trapped in the automatic part of their brain. And it's simply a case that they don't know how to come out. So it's a little bit like someone being trapped in one room in a house, even though this house has all of this bounty available to them. And they firstly don't believe that there's more to the house because they've spent so long in just that one room, but also they don't know how to come out. So they maybe come out for a moment and they're like, oh my God, like it's so amazing out here. But then the mind just automatically plonks them back in that same room. So there's a real technique to coming out of that part of the brain, the lizard part of the brain, the automatic functioning, and coming into the imaginative part of the brain, which is such a powerful part of the brain. And that is where we literally do create the reality that we want. It takes work. Like, I'm not saying it's easy. It takes work every moment to notice, wait, which part of the brain am I using right now? And how do I know?
Yeah, because often
I would say that would be the main reason that stops people living the life of their dream. They're just using the wrong part of their brain. Sorry, Chris.
No, I was just going to say, it's that how do you know? I mean, for a lot of people, when you're angry or when you're fed up, when you're depressed or resentful, whatever it is, you're having this reaction to your life, you're so in it and you're so attached to it that you can't see that it's almost like a separate part of you. It's not actually you. It's a kind of a state you're in rather than your actual sense of being. And so I suppose there's a mindfulness aspect to this. You have to kind of become aware of what's going on inside you, which again isn't easy. A lot of people, for example, when you get angry at something that's happening in the world, often that anger says more about you than it does about the thing that's going on in the world. But it's learning to recognize how you respond and react to situations. How do you turn that awareness, once you're kind of aware that I'm not angry, I'm in a state of anger, or I'm not feeling hopeless, I'm in a state of feeling hopeless. How do you turn that into something that you can consistently work on day in, day out to build something? Because it's fine to say, okay, I'm going to deal with this emotion now, but how can you consistently do it so that you're turning up every day and dealing with that and getting on with the good work,
Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned mindfulness. There's got to be some kind of practice to develop self-awareness. And really the best way to look at this is like just training a muscle. So for example, if I'm sitting here saying, oh, I would really love big biceps, but I'm not going to the gym every day, then it's not going to happen. So it's developing that self-awareness muscle, but it's also knowing how to do it. Now, I say that with like, I'm sort of like underlining it and I'm putting it in bold and I'm putting it in capital letters, because I spent the first several years when I first started a meditation practice, I didn't know what I was doing. And so actually, I wasn't really building my self-awareness. I was just staying stuck in that room and I was just beating myself up about it and not knowing how to get out. So for me, it was when I started working with someone who was basically able to explain the difference between observing myself and being stuck in that room. Then I began to really figure, oh, I've been meditating, but I've been meditating and just continually reliving the crapness of being trapped in my mind. So it's again, I would say it's so important to work with someone to know that you are developing your self-awareness rather than just continuing to be trapped in your mind. And then I would really recommend for the practice, you want to do some amount of breath work. So that for me, breath work is really fantastic, because what breath work does is it creates a sensation within the body that you can feel. And so what that does is it enables you to train your brain to feel a physical sensation. And that's a great way to wake you up when you've kind of fallen into this sleep of automatic thinking. So it's something that anchors you into the present moment, because you're like, oh, my heart's pounding right now because I've done 10 specific breaths from the breath work. So I know that feeling my heart pounding right now is something that's been created in the present moment, rather than dwelling on something in the past that's making me feel crummy. But the reason I'm feeling crummy is because I'm thinking of something that happened in the past. So breath work is great because it creates a physical sensation that anchors you to the present moment. Then I always encourage people to do a little bit of meditation or visualization work, or what I call it cognitive control. That's what I teach in my program. So I will guide my clients through a very specific meditation. So they're actually accessing a different part of the brain and they're getting an experience of what it's like to be in the imaginative part of their brain. So they're like, oh, this is how it feels to be in the automatic part, and this is how it feels to be in the imaginative part. So they're really being able to experience it. And they're also in that cognitive control part of the technique, they're learning how to start using their brain to create. So some kind of meditation practice, whether it's, again, you're meditating to follow the breath, or whether you're following a guided visualization, whether you're chanting a mantra. So again, that's going to develop your muscular capacity in your brain. It's going to develop your ability to slip, to find your way out of automatic thinking. And then the third practice I really recommend to develop self-awareness is journaling. But again, very specific journaling, because the mistake people make is they'll come to their journal, and I did this all through my 20s, my life is so rubbish. I just feel really depressed. You know what? So I always describe that to my clients as that's like trying to wash dishes, but in dirty dishwater. Like those dishes aren't going to come out clean. So you want to find a way to put fresh dishwater in. So I think, you know, journal prompts are really great. There's so many blogs online that offer really good journal prompts for self-development. So I might pick up my journal and just simply journal on a prompt, which is, what did I learn today? You know, something like that. So it's training your mind to focus on things that are going to be beneficial. So if we go back to that heads tails analogy, it's training your mind to look at the flip side, because that's going to help you see things differently. So journaling, but using journaling prompts. So those three are such a wonderful foundation for, you know, I call it upgrading the mind. So retraining your mind, upgrading your mind, developing self-awareness, and freeing you from that automatic thinking and enabling you to access that creative part of the brain. And then you can start creating the reality the way that you want to.
Some of this sounds almost kind of spiritual when you talk about kind of meditation and mindfulness practices. And, you know, a lot of it is very trendy at the moment, especially in kind of yoga circles and, you know, Instagram and all that kind of stuff. But I suppose there's got to be some kind of practical benefit. You know, this is 1,000-year-old wisdom, really. Monks have been doing this for thousands of years. And it's kind of seen a resurgence in popularity recently, I suppose. So there is some practical use to it. Do you think we kind of are a little bit biased against this kind of stuff, and that kind of impedes us a little bit? We think it's silly and it's woo-woo and a bit daft to be doing journaling. You know, we don't want to tell our mates that we're journaling every day. Do you think that's a big problem?
Such a great point. Such a great point, Chris. I think what it comes down to at its most basic is the mind's resistance to change. And then it's going to find a really compelling reason. So again, we can get really caught up in the story. Oh, I don't want to tell my mates, it's embarrassing. And that's a really compelling story. Or hang on, meditations for monks, or this spiritual stuff is woo-woo. Like those are all really compelling stories. They've all got evidence. But again, the way that we break it down is to say that's literally the mind saying, stay in this room, don't open the door and go into the rest of the house because it's dangerous. We might die. So to be honest, I would say, I mean, I'm a coach for writers, I'm a coach for creative entrepreneurs, but I do feel a little bit like a Trojan horse, because when, you know, people sign up to work with me because they want to make money from their writing, or they want to learn how to grow a successful business online. And they're obviously drawn to work with me. They've seen my content. They got a sense of my energy. And then they come into my program and I'm like, okay, we have these group coaching sessions, but we always begin the coaching session with a meditation practice, and we always do journaling. But because they've signed up and there's something about what I'm offering them, they're sort of willing to do it. But I'm not selling the program as a meditation program or as a journaling program, but I'm saying these are some of the things that you're going to learn how to do. And I'm always so honored by people who say, look, I've never done this before, but you know, I really want the results that you're talking about. And they give it a go. So I think it's like you say, there's so much history to the practices. And there's always going to be a reason why we don't believe in them, or we don't think they're right. I was massively resistant. So in my 20s, my meditation journey began. I was so anxious. My thinking had got to a level where I couldn't even decide how to brush my teeth. Like I was so overthinking. I was so self-critical that I was like, okay, this has really got to extreme levels. If I'm now questioning, am I brushing my teeth the right way? I was really struggling to read, and that had been something in my teens that I'd really enjoyed, but I was really struggling to focus my mind and read. And at that point, I knew the one thing that I really didn't want to do was meditate. And I had enough self-awareness to know if that's the one thing that I don't want to do, that's probably going to be the thing that is going to help me. And I went on my first meditation retreat, and it was unbelievably challenging. And yet it was the thing that started me on this journey, which now 20 years later, after a 20-year meditation practice, falling off the wagon many times, It is the one thing that has enabled me not just to free myself from my mind, but it has enabled me to see reality in a way that really serves me and have the tools and techniques to continue to create a reality that I love, that's really thriving. So yeah, I totally get the resistance to meditation, and I'd love it. I'd love to be able to say, hey, look, you can do all this without, but I actually don't think that you can.
Yeah. And because, I mean, there is a lot to be said for just taking a moment, even if you're not doing the kind of really deep work, just to take a moment to stop and pause and just have a break from all the stuff you're kind of, your to-do list and everything you're worrying about and all the kind of regrets from the past and worries about the future, and just having a moment of quietness just to take the pressure off, even if it's for 5 minutes. But you touched on something there, and it was reminded me of the conversation I had with Oliver Berkman on a previous podcast. And he said that often the greatest benefit comes from doing the things we don't want to do. And you didn't want to do meditation. I generally don't like the sound of my own voice, and I don't like my own face. So I decided to start a podcast and a YouTube channel to try and say, well, I don't like these things. I feel really uncomfortable doing them, so I'm going to do them anyway. Do you think we need to, the path to finding our truth, if you like, and the life we're looking for, is to embrace our vulnerability and see where our fears are kind of showing up and saying, hang on, if I'm scared of that, that's the route I need to be taking.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you've asked me to explore this. And it's great, that example that you've given of not wanting to do the podcast and the YouTube channel. One thing I've really noticed, working with writers and creatives, is that often what we're being called to do is something that we really don't want to do. I can't tell you how many writers I speak to who are afraid about what people think. And yet, isn't that really at the heart of what writing is? Like, it's asking us to put something out there in a vulnerable way that's going to be open to opinion, it's going to be open to feedback. So there's a belief that I've really come to adopt, which is that thing that we're dreading is actually the thing that is going to set us free, because it's the one thing the mind is resisting. And it's to understand the mind is resisting because it wants to keep you in this same old safe place. The mind wants you to stay alive, like that's its core program. And it basically says, if we do what we did yesterday, because we're alive today, then we'll stay alive. But of course, that means that we do what we did the day before. And that means that really we're doing what we did 10 years ago. And so if we actually heed that call to do the thing that we're afraid of, it's going to take us out of this cage that the mind has got us in. And the irony is, when we get out of that cage, what we experience is freedom. And I can't tell you, I mean, in the hundreds of writers and entrepreneurs that I've spoken to, when we really dig down to what they want, it is freedom. And freedom comes from doing the one thing that your mind doesn't want you to do, because it's the one thing that's on the other side of that cage. And the irony there is that's when you really tap into your true potential. I mean, I'd love to know how you have found it, like what you've discovered about what you're truly capable of, having started your podcast and starting your YouTube channel. I probably imagine that you've discovered more about yourself than you realized you had.
Yeah, I find I'm still very squeamish about recording these things. Normally after the conversation, I record an intro and I record an outro at the end, just to kind of introduce who I'm talking to and some of the themes that we're talking about. And it takes me, I must spend about an hour recording a 1 minute session, because I trip over my words and I cock it up and I get squeamish about how I sound and all this kind of stuff. And then ultimately I have to go kind of, that'll do. Let's just get it done and get it out there. And then when I get it out there, there's a great sense of achievement. And then it's on to the next thing. But there's also this kind of thing about, there was, I've forgotten his name now, but there's a very famous writer who said, nothing, what is it? Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And that was something that's really resonated with me. I used to have terrible hang-ups about money, and that was connected to my self-esteem. And, a letter would arrive from the bank and I would not open it. It would go in the drawer because I was too afraid of what the situation was. But it wasn't until I actually faced the situation that I was able to change it and to get into a better situation. That kind of built up my self-esteem a little bit and all that kind of stuff. And it was that uncomfortable thing that I didn't want to do. It's the same as kind of, if you're overweight, you don't want to do exercise, but it's actually exercise that will get you back into shape. Or if you're whatever it might be, if you're scared of water, it's jumping in and taking swimming lessons that's going to get you over that fear. And you mentioned right at the beginning that blind spot that you can't see. And that's what a coach will help you do is kind of, there's something there that you can't see, which is the way out for you. And I found it with my photography as well. I was so blinkered with my photography that I was determined to make a success as a photographer. And this is where I was going. I spent 10 years as a photographer, and I'd retrained after spending 10 years as a journalist. And I had a bad experience in journalism, went into photography, but never quite got the hang of the freelancing thing, so I couldn't make ends meet. But I was so determined that I wouldn't even have a picture on my wall unless it was one of my photographs. I couldn't enjoy art unless it was photography, because I was a photographer and that's who I was. And I was so attached to this thing that was causing me pain. But then through meditation and all the journaling and things like that, I kind of eventually let go of this kind of single-minded determination to be a photographer at all costs. And as soon as I let go of that, it's not like I'd given up and admitted defeat or anything like that. I still consider myself a photographer, but I'm also a writer and other things. But as soon as I kind of let go of that thing that I was holding on to, that's when my life suddenly, it got so much bigger. The world got bigger for me. And I suddenly realized it's like this thing I'm holding on to is this thing that I desire so much is actually the thing that's causing me a lot of pain here. And as soon as I let go of it, things got a lot better. So now whenever I feel in a kind of situation of discomfort about my life, I always think, what am I holding on to too much? What can I let go of? And then what will be revealed to me when I do let go? What answers can I find? And it's a funny situation to be in. Sometimes it does take courage, though, and that's the thing. Sometimes you have to. Brené Brown talks about stepping into the arena and being prepared to take a kicking. And there are going to be. I mean, you must get it with your YouTube channel, and I've seen your wonderful videos of you carrying your table into fields surrounded by cows and typing and all of that kind of stuff. You must have critics out there. How do you stop someone, a close friend who might have a kind of a little bit of a sarcastic dig at one of your videos or one of your books or something you've created, and they mean it in jest and they don't mean any harm, but how do you stop that from kind of knocking you back and saying, okay, well, maybe I don't want to do this after all?
Yeah, gosh, so much in what you've shared, Chris, that I want to pick up on. So I want to talk about this idea of the letting the thing go and like why we can be resistant to that. But I'll answer this question first. So if you think about the question you're asking me, like, how do I stop that dig, or how do I stop that unpleasantness or sarcasm? So it's not about stopping it. It's about understanding it's not there in the first place. So there's nothing to stop. So like, what do I mean by that? Like, okay, we've really got, we've gotten woo-woo here, right? So there is no dig, there is no sarcasm, because I don't see it as that. I don't see it as being about me. I see it as being about them. And what I'm seeing is someone saying, help. That's literally what I see. So if someone makes a snarky comment, they might say, like, one thing that comes to mind is someone saying, I think it was something about, I must have a lot of money. I think that was one of the comments that I received. So what I understand is that's about the person. So they're in a place where something's impacted them, some part of my content has impacted them, and their automatic response to being impacted is to make a challenge, to say, you've got something that I don't, and that's how I'm going to feel better in this moment. So what I'm seeing is not someone accusing me of being well off or being privileged. I'm seeing someone who's been hurt or been upset, and that's the only way they know to make themselves feel better. So I might then reach out to them and say, is there anything I can do? And often that will get rejected, and I'm fully aware that that's going to happen. But every so often someone will say, that's really kind of you, and I feel really bad for what I said. And I'm not offering my help to make them feel bad or to make them apologize. I'm literally offering my help because I think someone's going to write something unpleasant, they must be struggling with something, because they've reached for an old habit, it's like they found themselves in a situation and they think the only way to alleviate this situation is for me to be unpleasant, and so they must really be struggling. So yes, I don't see it as an attack on me. Now, that's not to say that I'm here like, oh, nothing affects me, like I'm in this place of joy always. Like, yeah, definitely the first thing I feel like when I see that is like, ooh, okay. But I've got a very quick reframe, and this might make you smile, like especially if I'm coming across as someone who is quite, I do have a beautiful, balanced spiritual practice. But when I get challenged in that way, that's a sign to me that I've reached the next level of success. Because I know the more successful I get on my platforms, the more people are watching. And I know the more people are watching, statistically, the more thumbs down I get. Like, it's just a numbers game. So again, if I get a thumbs down or if I get a negative comment, I kind of get that, oh, like I feel it. And then the first thing that comes to my mind is, oh, I must be a little bit more successful today.
Yeah. That's a
And
fantastic
immediately, like
reframe.
that,
Yeah.
that really helps. And then I remind myself, I say, remember, this person's in a place of pain. So then I think, right, how can I respond to that to say, I'm here if they need me? So either they won't respond back, or they might write another unpleasant comment. And then I think, okay, I'm not going to get through to them. Or they say, oh my God, thank you so much. Like, what was I thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of this whole idea of kind of letting go of something, how do we, I often kind of say, the things we hold on to are actually the things that are holding on to us. How do we know it's our thing to let go of, or even that we have something to let go of at all, and that's where
Yeah.
our discomfort's coming from.
Yeah. So I think that the key really is there discomfort going on? Because if there's discomfort, that's a real sign of something's not right. And so we then come back to like, well, what's causing this discomfort? Now, the most important part in this process is, as long as we continue to say it's that person, or it's that situation, or it's because that person said no, or it's because I'm not able to do this, there's no power that we have in that situation to improve it. And so we remain in that discomfort. And so what we're doing here is the mind is just living out a habit of powerlessness. It's like, I'm on that road, I'm driving down that road, and this street is called Powerlessness Street. And it's about a 50-mile street, and I've got to literally drive until I get to the end because I don't know how to turn off. So the self-awareness comes in to say, oh, looks like I've taken a wrong turn and I'm down on the powerlessness street again. So what can I do? So the first step is to say, how can I take some responsibility here? So if we look back at your example, you were saying that you were holding on to that photography career, but it had to be a certain way. And so it's the having to be a certain way that's causing the discomfort. Now, the reason we keep holding on to it is because the mind is like, if I let go of this, that could be death. Like, the mind is so basic, and that's why it does get attached to things. It has to be this certain way because it's part of our comfort zone. So that's why it is really challenging to let go. I actually did a YouTube video on this. So the analogy I gave, it's literally like you're holding onto a bar, but you imagine there's a drop beneath you. And that if you let go, you're going to fall, and you're basically just going to land at the bottom of the ravine. And it's like, good night.
Yeah.
It's splattered. So I think the practice here is to understand that, yeah, you'll let go, and yes, you'll fall, and that's pretty scary, but there's no ground beneath you. So there's no moment of splat. You will just keep falling. And when you allow yourself to just kind of experience that free fall, no ground beneath you, that's when you're in this beautiful liminal phase of like, whoa, anything can happen in this moment. So because you've let go, you're now in this opportunity to receive something. And that's, that picks up on something you said earlier, which is when you do let go, like, a beautiful opportunity comes along, because the opportunity is like, oh, thank God, they finally freed up their hands. I can now dive in. So it's letting go and understanding there's nothing to fall and splat onto. You will just continue to fall. And so, yeah, it might be that you're in a period of days where you're like, whoa, I'm just falling. I don't know what's going to happen. Might be a period of hours, might be a period of weeks. Certainly when people come onto my program, there's always a phase that everyone goes through where they have let go of something big, and they're kind of coming into group sessions going, I'm in that place of free fall. And there's a beautiful support in the community because others are like, just stay with it. Like, we've all been there. We know what it's like. And to resist the temptation to try to grab onto something like the next thing, and to just keep falling. And then, it's like this allowing. Finally, you can allow what's really yours and what you really deserve to come to you.
I suppose that you need a kind of sense of faith that everything's going to be all right. And especially at the beginning, you need faith that, okay, I've been meditating for a day, or I've been writing for a day, but I'm still not convinced it's going to work. So you need that kind of faith to turn up the next day and the next day after that as well. And I suppose there's a sense of courage in there as well that you need, which can be the hard thing, I suppose, finding the courage to actually take ownership and make a move. You said you work with kind of a community. You have a community of people you work with. Is there a kind of sense of support, sort of beyond just that kind of that one-to-one relationship? Is there a sense of kind of, I'm with friends here and everyone's buoying themselves up?
Yeah, I think this sense of support comes a few different ways. Firstly, there's a huge experience of support that comes when someone in the group is sharing something and suddenly you're like, oh, I'm not the only one that is afraid of this, or I'm not the only one who thinks this. So that can be really lovely. And also when you're listening to how I might be talking to someone who's struggling with a similar thing, and you're able to observe that conversation. So you're really learning how to observe something. You're saying, okay, I can relate to that. And I'm seeing how Gabriela's talking to that person. So you're kind of getting the secondary benefit of that. So that's one of the main areas of support. And then another area is where someone brings a challenge to the group and you get that comment from someone else who's like, I was also there. And that does give them the faith. So it might be that someone's done a sequence of videos and someone who's come in new to the group hasn't yet done the videos. And they're like, oh my God, I've just started, but I just don't know. And then I'll say to someone, oh, can someone who's done the videos, share like what was their journey like? And they might share like, oh, well, the first week was really challenging, but I was just able to keep going. And then I started to notice some benefits. So I think that helps with the faith that you were talking about. And I think also the fact that we're all in this boat together, like there's something about the fear of like, oh my God, like I just committed to my dreams and like I just paid someone, I don't really know her. Like I watched a YouTube video and now she's like supposed to help me sort all of this out. Like it's really scary. And so I think when you come into a community and you're like, oh my God, like we're all doing it. We're all trying to be nuts and have these amazing lives. Like it's not just me. It's not just me having this crazy dream and being a fool for investing my time and my money and my emotion into it. So it's that sense of camaraderie, like we're all nuts, we're all going for our dreams. And I think in terms of what you said about faith, we have to have this faith or we have to have this courage. I also think, and this is something I really notice when I'm working with people, it simply helps to understand what the mind is trying to do. So this idea of like, will it work? Or like, I've been meditating, I've been journaling, but I still feel rubbish. We can then make the conclusion of, oh, there's something wrong with me. Like it works for others, but it just doesn't work for me. Like there's just something I can't fix in myself. So it's really useful to understand that that's the way the mind works. The mind wants you to stay in this fixed place. The mind wants you to doubt making change because it doesn't want it. And so when you journal for a day and you still feel rubbish, rather than hear the voice that says it's not going to work, you can hear the voice that says it's not going to work and go, oh, that's exactly what my mind is designed to tell me. And so it helps people realize that that's what they're trying to change, just simply the way that they relate with their mind. It's not about, is it going to be possible? Will it work for them? It's simply, let me teach you the tools to change the way that you relate to your mind. And to have that sense of like, oh, this is just stuff that anyone can learn, just as the way that we would learn how to plant seeds and grow a flower. It's just like a step by step. And this is how you learn how to relate differently to your mind. So yeah, there is a little bit of faith in that you're going to be able to keep the practices up, but there's also a nice kind of practicality to it as well. So it doesn't just feel like, oh my God, like I just have to have this kind of courage and, you know, just hope it's going to work for me. It's like, okay, if I do the practices, if I show up each day and I start to really understand the way my mind is working, then I know that I can break free from this.
I suppose that it's almost like there are two phases to life. There, you can have one phase where you just fall back into the kind of the structures and frameworks that are provided for you. You know, the traditions. You come out of school, you get a job, you do all the things you're supposed to do, and then that will lead you on a way through life. But then there's another framework where you take more active control of things, and you say, I have the power actually to influence where I'm going, and I'm going to work on that, and I'm going to kind of reprogram myself to choose my own course a little bit. And I suppose you mentioned before we started recording the podcast that you've just launched a 30-day course, and you touched on it then when you were talking about your members of your community with the videos and things like that. How does that work? What's the course all about?
Thanks for asking, Chris. So this has come from a couple of years of doing work with the clients in my community. Once a year, we spend 30 days and I come into the Facebook community and I do a live session, and I do it at 6 a.m. every morning. Now, I'm not saying to people you have to get up at 6 a.m. and do it. It's just that's when I like to do the video. And the practice is we do a breathing technique. We do a 10-minute cognitive control exercise. So we're really looking at accessing and working with the brain in a different way. And then we do journaling. And so what this is doing, it's teaching people how to be with themselves in a different way. So if we talk about those frameworks that you mentioned, it's showing us how we can step free of the frameworks that we've learned to be in. And there's no challenge or judgment. Like, I'm not shaking my fist going, oh, you know, down with the hierarchy. Like all these frameworks are just so rubbish. I'm simply saying that's how it was. And the mind has been programmed to run in these frameworks. Doesn't realize that there's this whole open plane of potential available. So I'm literally teaching the mind how to access that whole open plane of availability where ideas are literally abundantly growing, just as wildflowers grow out in earth and ground that hasn't been tamed. And so what we're doing through these practices is we're very specifically teaching the mind how to open, so to come out of these frameworks and from this open place, create that dream future. And what we're also doing is teaching the mind how to believe in that dream future. Because it's all very nice to say, woohoo, I just had this great session. I did some journaling and now I believe I'm going to be a millionaire artist and having sellout exhibitions. But then we sort of, like, a couple of hours later, we're like, you know, when we come down from that high, we're kind of like, I don't know, it's going to be really hard. I don't know where to start. So what I'm teaching through these videos is actually how to train your brain to believe in something new. And again, there's a real step-by-step process to that. It comes down to this phrase very simply, you have to see it to believe it. Like, that's one of the steps where we're learning about how to specifically visualize something in a way that makes your brain and your body go, actually, this feels real. And so that really counteracts procrastination, because you're waking up the following day and you're like, how can I not sit down at my laptop and take action on this dream? Because it just feels too real. So the reason I choose 30 days is because it's a nice period of time to really start programming the mind. Like, I'm not saying, oh, by the end of those 30 days, like, everything's magical, your life will have been totally transformed. But what I'm noticing is that at the end of that 30 days, the clients who go through the video sequence, they say that they experience a belief in themselves, a belief that what they want is possible. And I'm like, you know, if that's what I'm selling, that feels like a really lovely thing to sell, to be able to teach someone at the end of 30 days to have more clarity on their dream and to believe that it's possible, because, like, that's the foundation. And then if they stay in the program after that, we start taking the steps. But for anyone who's looking at that place where they're like, I would like to get a little bit of clarity about what's calling me, about what that alternate life could be, and I'd love to be in a place where I just believed it was possible, then that video sequence would be great for them.
It really reminds me of there's a motivational speaker called David Brooks, and he has this very famous saying that successful people have two beliefs, and one is that the future can be better than today, and the second is that I have the power to make it so. And I suppose that's what those 30 days are all about. It's showing you that by taking action and seeing the results, even if they're just small results to begin with, that actually, yeah, you can have some influence of, shifting your life in a direction that suits you if you want to, and you're prepared to make a little bit of effort. Anything is possible.
Yeah. And I think you're so right in terms of those small actions or those small results. Like, we've had some really lovely feedback. So we're actually on day, what are we now? So it's the 27th today. So we're on day 27 of the program. So I run it live throughout April, but then I also have it recorded on videos. And, we've had some lovely feedback from people who are just saying things like, I'm just interacting with friends and family in a different way because they're seeing themselves differently. And they're thinking, this is how I want to be with my friends and family now. Or people saying things like, my dream, just like, it feels so much closer than I thought. So before they started the 30 days, they were like, oh my God, this just feels like a pipe dream that is like decades away. And then they're sort of having these realizations of like, actually, it's like just a few steps away. So again, that sort of illusion that the mind can feed us, when we start to see through that illusion, we realize that what we want is actually, oftentimes it's right there, or if it's not quite within our grasp, it's sort of just a few steps and then you've got it.
Do you think, and it's one final thing, because I know we're kind of pushed for time, but do you think that there's a sense of the more you embrace the vulnerability and the thing you're afraid of? So on the one hand, when I started making videos, but the first video I put up, I was so incredibly self-conscious. Do you think that the way towards success is to not only embrace that, but to really push it as far as you can? So I'm there sort of in my car with my phone in front of me recording a video, but you're now producing videos where you're, at your table in the countryside typing away. And it's, for me, that's kind of like going, oh, what will my friends think if I do that? They'll think I'm being really daft or something like that. But actually I should be embracing that, because that's where the liberation comes from. Be your weird self, do the kind of crazy out there thing and see what happens.
I think if we come back to this, the real simple phrase, what will my friends think? They'll think I'm really daft.
Yeah.
So that's what's keeping you in a place where this is just the kind of video I'm able to do anymore. And I start to really push against, like, what will people think? They'll think I'm daft. So it's to understand that that's the persona that you have, which keeps you in this small space. This persona says you can do this much, which is make a video on your phone, but you can't go into a field with a typewriter because people will think that's silly. And so it's to understand that that persona is not actually who you really are. And that's why there is that call, that sort of stretch to go a little bit further. So I would say for me, when I take my table out into a field with horses and I start typing on my typewriter, I discover the version of me beyond that cage, beyond that small, cramped mental cage. And the persona of me in that small, cramped mental, it is a kind of a mental cage, mental cage. The version of me in that cage is, she's hated, she's weird, she's stupid, she's got no talent, she's not going anywhere. So for me, it's like, I don't want to feel like that person, because I know it's not real. I know that person is just a sum of some really bad experiences I had from my past. So I now see it, that it's not, oh, typing on a table with horses around me, people are going to think I'm weird or daft. I'm like, get me out there in that field, because that's when I really feel free. It feels, there is an adrenaline rush for sure. But also, I think for me, I've experienced not the comments from people saying you're daft. For me, I've experienced the comments from people saying that really inspired me, like that message, I really needed to hear that. And to me, that's more important. The people who think I'm daft, I'm like, okay, that just says that they're struggling with something. But for me, it's about reaching the people who think, what's she doing? And
Yeah.
who is this woman? And like, why has she got her typewriter? And for me, if there's just one person who sees that video and reaches out and says, I've got a dream, but I don't really know what it is, and can you help? It's like, it was worth it.
The big thing for me is what will people think? And it's
Mm,
in my head, I have this idea that there's someone out there who's going to think I'm a complete idiot for doing the things I do. But
yeah.
then, but I can't pinpoint who it is. It's no one in particular. There's no
Mm-hmm.
actual person, I've created a kind of fictitious person in my head who will
Mm,
be judgmental against me for trying to trying to do interesting things and things that I enjoy. And I think recognizing that it's not even a real person, and like you were saying at the very beginning about it's not real, it's actually a reflection of how other people feel. When
yeah.
people are critical, I think
Yeah.
that's a really strong thing to understand. And by taking action, we can build our confidence a little bit and get a bit stronger. So um,
This area, actually, the what will people think, it comes from, if you think about the fact that we've evolved, the brain has evolved, and we are the result of generations. So this working mind that we have is very out of date.
yeah,
We've now got a world that is so different to how it was hundreds, thousands of years ago. So we've evolved from a mind that can't survive outside of the tribe.
yeah,
And what we know from how tribes work is there's like a tribe leader who basically says, you're in or you're out. So when we've got this sense of like someone out there, and with that kind of fear, that's literally just historical programming in the mind. It's like what we've evolved from, not wanting to piss off that one person, which
yeah,
is why it doesn't really have a persona. It's kind of just this sense. So, you're sensing this kind of evolution from the tribe. But of course, now, in order to survive as a creative, we need to be the person that ventures out on their own and builds the community around us.
so we're
And so
being the
that's
leader, really. Yeah,
for me, that's what I really notice in my work. Because of my understanding of how the brain works, it's like helping people shift from saying it's going to be a good thing to get kicked out of the tribe, because what tribe are you currently in? And is it a tribe that loves what you do? Is it a tribe of your ideal clients? Is it a tribe of people who are buying your services and your books? If not, you do need to pack your bags and get
yeah,
kicked out of your current tribe. So like the thing, we come back to the thing that you're afraid of is the very thing that needs to happen. You need to say, this is what I do. And you need to have everyone who's currently around you go, that's not for me. So you then actually do have to say, right, well, I better go find the people who
yeah.
this is for. And until you do show up, those people aren't actually going to get to see you and who you really are. So they're not going to be able to become your new tribe.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's really powerful stuff, especially that whole idea of, we're kind of reinforcing this persona every time we're kind of too afraid to just push a little bit further into our sort of out of our comfort zone. We're reinforcing that persona of someone who's scared and afraid and not courageous enough to take ownership of their kind of future, if you like. So I really appreciate that. So just to wrap things up, if people want to find out more about you and the 30-day program and any of the kind of services you're offering, where can they find out more?
Yeah, so I'm just at the moment I'm just running these free masterclasses. So the free masterclasses it's a really great way for people to experience the work, and that gives them a real taste of the 30-day program. So they don't even have to jump straight in to the 30-day program, which you can find out about on my website. There's a free masterclass that I offer, and the masterclass is showing people how to go from stressed to their very best. And so the stressed state is that lizard part of the brain that I was describing, which is that automatic place, and their very best is that creative part of the brain. So it's really teaching them how to harness their creativity and train their brain for success. So that might be a great place for them to start with the free masterclass. It's around 40 minutes. It gives them a taste of the visualization work that I do, the cognitive control meditation, also gives them a taste of the journaling I do. So that might be a nice place to start. If people are like, oh, I like the idea of these 30 videos, but am I ready to like invest and jump straight in? I'd also recommend for them to head over to my YouTube channel. So, you've seen some of my videos there. We release 2 videos a week. And for me, that's a place where I get to at least share some quite valuable content. Again, if people aren't ready to come in and do the deeper work and sign up for the program, they might want to just like get a feel for me, hear more about the sort of things that I talk about, the mindset coaching that I talk about. So the YouTube channel is another great place to interact with me as well.
Fantastic. Well, I will share all the URLs and everything on my website and in the show notes and in the outro and intro and all that kind of stuff. But I just that's really very valuable advice. I'm really grateful for everything you've shared today. I think it's really practical stuff that you can use to just take a bit more of a kind of controlling or steer your life in the direction that's more beneficial to where you want to be going. So I'm very grateful for that. And grateful for your time.
Well, Chris, I that means a lot to me. I also want to share that gratitude back because you've asked such fantastic questions. I mean, for me, I think when I do interviews, I can only offer as much value as I'm being asked to offer. So, you're clearly a beautiful listener and you've really just helped steer the conversation, and you've really kind of helped me pour out what needed to be said by asking such fantastic questions and really picking up on the points that I've been making. So thank you. It's been an absolute treat. I've loved it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Well, have a good day. And and I will let you know when things go live. So
perfect. Thanks, Chris. You take care.
So that was Gabriela Blandy kindly sharing some of her wisdom about how we can get out of our own way. Sometimes the obstacles that are in front of us between where we are now and where we want to be aren't anything to do with the outside world, but are actually our own fears and insecurities getting in the way. We worry about what people might think, we worry about what could go wrong. And actually, we're better off half the time just getting on with it and knuckling down and just making progress every day and facing our fears head on and saying, okay, what are you going to show me? Let's do this. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that. You can find out more about Gabriela at her website. That's www.gabrielablandy.org. And you can find all the links to her website, her socials, her YouTube channel, and also that amazing free masterclass on the show notes. And that is at www.conversationsonliving.com. You can also find out more about my books, my writing, and other podcast episodes there as well. Hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you'll subscribe and rate this podcast, put a lot of love into it, and I hope you'll stick around for future episodes. We've got some very interesting and insightful people chatting with us soon. All right, thanks a lot. Take care.